So my sound and video is good. No
Yes,
changes needed.
wonderful.
Okay, good.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight. I'm Judith Kvova, and today we continue our little series about the bloodlines. I already did one interview with Wayne Steiger from a different perspective, but of course, no series would be complete without talking to Gary Wayne about this subject. So, Gary, welcome.
Well, thank you for inviting me back. It's been a few months, so looking forward to a conversation that is sort of simple on the surface, but very, very complicated as you peel it back. And so it's going to be, we're going to try and keep it as simple and as clear as possible, but this is a very, very large subject, I think.
Oh yeah, it is. So Gary, for those people that might stumble on this video and have never seen a Gary Wayne interview in their life, explain to us a little bit, what do you talk about when you talk about bloodlines?
When I talk about bloodlines, I think the best way to start is to put something on the table that people can see visually today, and then maybe sort of bring it back to the beginning and maybe work towards the middle after that, because we're talking about bloodlines that go for over 6,000 years. And they're important to understand why it's important for people to know this. So if we look at bloodlines today, the easiest place to look for people to understand the bloodlines would be the nobility class, would be the royal class, the royals. And there's many, many branches of the royals, and cousins and second cousins and 15th cousins. That's all part of the nobility class, but they're all part of certain bloodlines and royal bloodlines that all intermarry, which also make it more complex in terms to understand it. So a lot of people will get a hold of me and say, can you just sort of lay out all of the the main bloodlines over the last 6,000 years? And it's going, you have no idea how complex that is.
And Gary will be busy for the rest of his life.
Exactly. And so it's hard to get down to that level of detail with all the different royal families, but they tend to intermarry to keep those bloodlines pure and to ennoble those bloodlines, because the more pure and ennoble those bloodlines are from within the families is where they fit in the overall sort of cult and culture of their belief system. And so this has been the ruling class since civilization started. And it's the civilization that has been run by these royals all over the world. So it's not just a European phenomena or a Middle East phenomena. It's a global thing that is all interconnected. And that they keep their genealogies to track their pedigree. And that's important because of what they believe, that their genealogies go back to. And so you get sort of two nexus points where they like to take those genealogies back. And depending on whether or not you're familiar with the flood story, or whether or not you believe the flood story or not, isn't really important, because it's what they believe and what they're doing with that belief system. And so they track their bloodlines all the way back to the originating dynasties right after the flood, and through various families of what we would call Rephaim and Nephilim. Rephaim after the flood. They obviously believe Nephilim also survived the flood in their belief system, which is a possibility. We have to be open to that, even though I subscribe to more of the giant families being created after the flood and before the flood in separate incursions, and that these are created by fallen angels. And these are the families that usurped the dynasties after the flood and intermarried with select bloodlines that they needed to I guess gain a sort of control over humans. So for example, you would have Nimrod, who intermarries with the Rephaim families in Mesopotamia. And between that and the giants that are controlling Egypt and the bloodlines that are scion into Nimrod, they form the Pharaoh dynasties, which are the two most important empires after the flood. But they also take their bloodlines back to the giants created in Genesis 6:4 before the flood, as those bloodlines surviving the flood, as I mentioned, and to what would be known in other religions and mythologies around the world would be the heroes of Greek mythology. So like Zeus or Zeus creates Hercules and through a human female, just as happens in Genesis 6, or the 10 hero titan kings of Atlantis that Poseidon and a human female would create. And you have this story repeated in every culture around the world that creates this ruling class of priests, warriors, and kings. And that's the nobility class that sets up the feudal system, with the humans being the serfs and the slaves at the bottom, and them reigning over top of the humans. And this is what has been placed right from the beginning. And that's why it's important to understand where the royals get their divine right to rule from, that they claim. It comes from the gods as their godfathers, right? And I don't use that term loosely, because the fallen angels have governance over the earth for a period of time, and through the assembly of the gods, and with Satan at the head. And until the end time, they rule. So these are the representatives of those fallen angels ruling in the physical world on the earth for those governing angels, the watchers, the archons, whatever you want to call them.
Okay, so does that have anything to do with what people call serpent seed?
It's akin understanding, if I would put it that way. So typically the serpent seed is held by some Christians, but very typically a constitutive doctrine of the Gnostics and the secret societies that are all part of the organizational structure of the bloodlines. And so the belief is this, is that Cain was not the offspring of Adam and Eve. That Cain is the offspring of Satan and Eve, or Satan and Lilith, or other fallen angels and Eve, because they have many recorded in their gospels. They have several versions of that, so it's not all that consistent. From a Targum or a Talmudian from Babylon, the Babylonian Talmud and the Targum that comes down, which is the oral traditions of the mystical Jewish people, they taught the same thing. It's not written there in the Bible, but they use a lot of allegory and symbolism to get there, even though clearly the Bible says in Genesis 4 that Cain is the son of Adam and Eve. And even if you take that back to Hebrew, it still says the same thing, even though you can trace the Hebrew word kana back to begotten or God. But clearly that's the same wording that is used when the offspring of Cain and his wife produce. And then it's the same wording as for Adam and Eve with Seth. So the overall application, I've got like a 4-series document on this that I walk through what the Gnostics believe and actually what Scripture says and the arguments that people use for it. So whether or not you believe in the serpent seed or not, that is basically the same idea, where you have a fallen angel, Satan, who didn't go to the abyss for his crime, which is one indication. And Cain is never really spoken of as a giant in Christianity, but he is in Gnosticism. And this is the king that starts the Sumerian kingship that is listed in the Larsa list of kings and the Sumerians kings list. And so they start that line of a royal bloodline right from the beginning, according to the Gnostic and the polytheist belief. So that's, a quick sort of nutshell version of the two sides in terms of what they believe.
Mm. Yeah, that was a little bit, I have never heard that actually Cain was conceived in the Garden of Eden, but not Adam was the father, but Satan. So I had never heard that before. And yeah, it's highly disputed. And it's frowned upon even. So yeah.
And so that makes Cain, in that belief system, another line of Nephilim. That's a different creation than the giants created in Genesis 6. And it's backed up by Genesis 3:15, which is the seed of the serpent will be at odds with the seed of Eve. In terms of, when I look at all the arguments, I mean, they're good arguments, but it's not consistent with Scripture. And we don't get that smoking gun verse that says that happened. And also, Satan didn't lose his arms and his legs and everything else. It was the Nakash, the serpent, the Nahash is probably how it's more properly pronunciated, that takes the punishment, not Satan. And so it's an interesting thought, and I don't, totally rule it out. I just can't make a proper biblical case for it without getting in contradiction with other verses. And every argument that they present is taken out of its context, or they're using an alternate meaning, and it doesn't fit with the sentence that they're taking one word out, but they sort of just use a smorgasbord approach to say, here's why the Bible says it. And I'm going, well, it doesn't make sense if you read the rest of the sentence, if you substitute that word.
So what is interesting to me, usually when we hear the word bloodline, then people think of DuPonts, Astors, Rockefellers, Rothschilds, and I'm not saying they are not, but it seems to me that a lot of people forget the royals. And to me, they are much higher up in the pecking order.
Sure. Well, in the Rothschilds, well, let me start first of all, is that if they're too visible, other than actually being known as a royal family, who takes very much a back seat all around the world today by design, if they're families like the Rothschilds or the DuPonts, they're too visible. And they are intermarried into the bloodlines. Sometimes they may even be distant on down the chain in terms of the bloodlines, but they're not the ones who have the real power and the real money. If they're that visible, then they're just working for other people. So the Rothschilds, for example, they were originally named the Bauer family in Germany, and they were funded by some local princes and some Masonic organizations to replace the banking arm of what the Templars were doing before 1307 and their dispersion. And so they became this banking institution that the Templars were, that was set up outside the Catholic Church. And they changed their name to the Rothschilds when they set up the London Bank in about 1811, 1812, somewhere in that zone, to sort of take away the sort of the Jewish kind of connotation to it. And they basically chose a name that is an allegory for part of their belief system, like the red shield or the red sign or the red mark, right? Because in the Rosicrucian belief system, the mark of Cain is that red mark. It is a circle with kind of an ankh in it, and the circle is an oribus, so serpent clutching its tail with its mouth. So that's the mark that they believe. That I don't know whether that's the true mark or not, but that's what they believe is the mark of Cain.
I've read in very ancient text, and there it says that the mark of Cain was white leprosy.
Yeah, and if it's clearly written that way in the book that's called the Book of Lamech of the Line of Cain, which is an extension of the Book of Og, and a series that an author is worked with apparently some priests out of the Vatican to translate. And that's where that sort of supports it. Whether or not those are true scriptures or not, we don't know. And it's also a legitimate case that he would be with that white skin, which would sort of play into why he's also adopted as a giant, because the Nephilim and the Rephaim are believed to have pale white skin, just as the Horing goes back to like white bread and white in terms of the skin color. And the Tuatha De Danann had that pale white skin and is all part of that Aryan sort of mythology. And so that would sort of fit in with that in terms of a skin color, that he was cast out like the other giants, except that we don't get the giants scripturally being recorded until Genesis 6. So whether or not that's the mark or not, again, it's a good legitimate case that it would have been a pale white skin. And you know, the people that are talked about in Genesis before the flood, whether or not it's the Cainites or it's the Sethites, they're thought to be the Blackheads or the Sumerians, which would have had more of a Middle Eastern color, as it's theorized, and black hair. And so we don't know whether or not Cain's hair color would have went blonde or red hair, which is again typical of the hair color of the Nephilim and the Rephaim, but perhaps that was the case as well. But we don't get a hair color description for Cain anywhere. So there's certainly that as a possibility that would be sort of that mark that somehow changes DNA to make that skin so much of a different color. But then again, that would also be argued by the serpent seed people to say, well, he's got the DNA of a fallen angel, right? So that would be one of the things that they would use to make that argument. But the book of Lamech of Cain is not canonized, so we don't know how much corruption, if it's legitimate. We don't get any copies of it before about 500 AD, so it's very much apocryphal. But it's interesting that the Catholic Church would have let that be released, and one would think there's an agenda to that as well.
Yeah, that might be. On the other hand, I mean, we have so many old scriptures that some of them do not necessarily have to do with religion, and yeah, I mean, who's to judge?
Yeah, so we have to be aware of these, and for me, I mean, it starts with where your belief system is. So you need to do enough research to decide what you kind of believe.
Yeah.
And for me, I measure everything against what's in the Bible. I don't totally dismiss everything that's outside of it. I look for how it lines up. And if it's not completely directional with the Bible, I'll consider it as possible context, but not totally dismiss it. But I won't accept it, as part of what I think happened in prehistory, unless I can get something that I can support it in the Bible. But people might think that's a little bit closed-minded until you understand that the Bible actually says a lot more than what people think it says. That lines up a lot with what's recorded in other cultures.
Yeah. But on the other hand, I'm sure, let's say, the book of Enoch is not in the Bible as well, but I'm pretty sure you found it helpful.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it runs about 99% consistent with Scripture. It has a few corruptions to it, I would say corruptions. The reason why it's apocryphal, and I like First Enoch a lot, as opposed to Second Enoch or Third Enoch, or the Book of Giants, where the Book of Og and the Book of Lamech of Cain are said to come through the Book of Giants of the Manichaeans. That's sort of a long chain in terms of that, but I like to know the history of stuff, so I have better idea as to what the validity of what's being written in there is. And so First Enoch is, like I said, I think the best written one. And the reason why it's apocryphal is because we don't have a complete Hebrew manuscript of it. We only have fragments. And so we get two versions coming down to us. One that was first translated by fellow by the last name of Bruce, who's a descendant of Robert the Bruce and a Freemason and a Gnostic. And that's the Giez version from Ethiopia, which is the longer version, has a few more chapters than the Aramaic version that came out of the Dead Sea area.
Mm. Yeah, the entire thing to me is a little bit suspicious. You know, when they, was it the Council of Nicaea, when they decided what goes into the Bible and what doesn't.
Yeah.
I have a problem with that. Whenever a small group of men, not because they are men, let's say a small group of people make big decisions for the majorities, I'm always a little bit on the edge. You know what I mean?
Exactly, because we don't know whether or not there was actual biases that went into that, and what they ignored that they shouldn't have. So, and what's also interesting is that there isn't anything in the canon that was assembled that would include what they call the hagiography of the Jewish people, which were 70 scroll library of documents that didn't hit the canon. So, and why, we don't know. I don't even know all of the names of them, but I know that was part of what the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Essenes were teaching from. And so it's interesting that none of that made it into the canon. But what is in there for the Old Testament is fairly consistent with the Old Testament of the Hebrews, and then the New Testament. I mean, we don't know what they were truly basing that on.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there was Greek manuscripts all with different sort of datings on it, and I know they tried to go to the earlier datings and to assign who the author was and things like that, but clearly in that process we don't know what biases might have went in and what should have been in there, and why they eliminated what the motivation was. So yeah, I'm always a little bit suspicious about that as well. And that's why I'm kind of open to reading things, and then I can judge for myself whether or not I think, well, that lines up quite well. Because Scripture, in my opinion, and I know people may take umbrage with this, but I don't believe Scripture contradicts itself. It's that you need to put all of the verses together, then you find that there's no contradiction. But when you try and cherry pick and then say, let's cherry pick this one and then one over here and say, yeah, they don't quite match up, so that's a contradiction, except that there's a half a dozen other passages that link them together that tell you the story. So that's kind of how I measure the other scriptures to see is does it run consistent? And I'm not concerned about them having more information. I'm more concerned is that more information directionally the same. And so when I look at First Enoch, I look at it that way. But I also have to look at it that, you know, we don't have that Hebrew manuscript. We only have the Greek and the Aramaic that the Aramaic was translated from, and the Giez one, and you get things in there like the angels building the ark. Well, they didn't build the ark. That's a Gnostic belief system. Or you've got Enoch being 550 years old, or 500 years old, sorry. And he wasn't 500 years old if this is Enoch's son of Jared, which first Enoch is accredited to. He was taken to heaven at 365. So that looks to me like a purposeful corruption leaning towards Enoch, son of Cain. But that scripture clearly isn't a polytheist doctrine or a scripture. So as opposed to second Enoch or third Enoch. So I know both Enochs wrote scripture, but they had a completely different lens. One was monotheistic, one was polytheistic.
Why is it that we hear very little about the Eastern bloodlines? Let's say the Singhs, the Khans, the Lees.
Yeah, yeah.
It's almost, you know, sometimes as if they are non-existent. And the Lees are also a bunch of interesting people.
Yeah, and let me first start by saying that we get too caught up in the West with the 13 families, and those are just Western families. That's all they are. It's not the rest of the world.
But the fact that there are Eastern bloodlines means
yes,
the agenda is consistent no matter where you move to.
exactly, and that's what you need to understand, except that they're rivals. But then each of the 13, they're rivals. But then again, 13 families are all rivals of each other, because ultimately they want to present their dragon messiah as the dynasty that's going to rule the millennium. So there can only be one family, just like in the Highlander movies. And so if you look at Xi Jinping, people don't realize he's part of the Li family.
Yeah.
So there's the first part of his name, which is XI, is pronounced Xi, and that's part of the Shah dynasty, XIA, and it's transliterated both ways down through history. And one's an Eastern, and one's a Western bloodline within Chinese history. But this is the complete dynasty right from the Shah original creation of that tribe and family by the dragon kings, the Yellow Emperor, as my history recalls. And they ruled right up until the time the communists took over. And then Lees started to pop up in the 60s and 70s and have controlled for the last 20 or 25 years. And Xi, who has declared himself leader for a lifetime, has basically set up his new dynasty. And Lees are also part of the holders and controllers of the secret societies throughout China and Southeast Asia. And Li families are always in charge of those secret societies, and there's many of them. And they're considered equals with the Western societies, so that the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, all the names that are visible would regularly communicate and still do. But they head up all of those secret societies, and they also head up all of the Triad and organized crime families. And in every country it has a Li member as well. Now people are going to say, well, it's the most common name. That's true, but they have their genealogies that they go by to control all of this. And the dragon creator gods are just another name for seraphim angel. It's the same watchers that created the Nephilim. It's the same serpentine gods that created the heroes like Hercules and Atlas. It's the same creator serpent gods that created the royal family in Egypt, or the serpentine kings and gods in Sumeria. It's the same thing all over the world, whether or not even if you go into the Kishamaya, and before and after the flood, those are the feathered serpents. It's the same gods, and it's the same thing that they do is they created the offspring all around the world. So you have these royal families all around the world. So, and you know, you look at there's a lot of royal families in India. The two most predominant ones would be Singh and Khan. And Singh is basically means lion, and it's a little bit more recent, but it sort of goes back into that lion type of bloodline, and I won't dwell on that. But if you ever heard about the lion men of Moab, or Nirashima as a lion god, but typically it comes through the Brahmin line as the royal bloodline would come through, and the Singh would be sort of a parallel line, and that's connected directly to the Naga bloodlines. It's kind of like an extension. One seems to be after the flood, and one seems to be before the flood. But to me, it's very hard to get enough information on the subcontinent of India to get some firm sort of dates and lineage. But the Nagas were, again, these seraphim angels, and they created the priest class and the warrior class and the noble class. And so those are the two most dominant ones that are coming out of India. But you know, you've got families like the Ingaroka out of the Inca that control South America, and you've got the Hidalgos, or that might be Basque, but you've got families that come out of the Aztecs and the Maya, and all of those royal families that intermarried with the Spanish and the Portuguese royal families. And most people think those royal families were eliminated. Only the current king was executed. And by 1550, all of the stature and position of the royal families throughout South America and Central America was reestablished.
Yeah.
And then they started to intermarry with the Europeans.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
you have these bloodlines all over the world.
Yeah. And with the Lee family, when you mentioned the Triad, I had to laugh because I read where somebody said, you have to envision the Triad, the secret society, as a mixture of masonry and mafia.
It is. It is. Well, and again, I mean, and you look at the Western versions, actually the leader of a family, again, think of the genealogy, and the head of the families is a godfather. And the godfathers are the fallen angels that created the bloodlines. And they are working, and the reason why organized crime is never removed is it's part of the same organization, right? They're controlling society from both ends all of the time. They've always got things under control, so that people, and there's too many names to remember and repeat, but you know, like out of the Aztecs, you have the Montezuma family that's still in place today, and you have out of the Miztecs, you have the Iturbidis, and you've got also you've got the Villa, I'm going to read this, Villa Gomez family out of the Miztecs, and which are pure Amerindis. And so that just gives you a few idea. There's also from the Olmec bloodlines, you've got the Tlaxcalans that also intermarried into the Hidalgos of Europe. And like I say, this web is so large, but the thing to keep in mind is it doesn't matter where you go.
Yeah, exactly.
It's exactly the same place, and it's the same societal structure that's put in place, which was generally a 4-class level caste system, right? So you have the royal ruling class, and you have the priest class, and then you have the smaller sort of middle class, independent, small farmer or baker or craftsman. That gives you sort of a small free enterprise zone, but it's still all the big businesses owned by the nobility class. And then you have the slaves, or the complete serving class, or the poor people, or the people that did all of the manual labor. That's the same setup that's in First Nations in North America, and still in place today. And they still abide by the bloodline chiefs as the rulers. So it doesn't matter whether you go to India, it doesn't matter whether you go to China, it doesn't matter whether or not you go to Europe or European North America. You had that same system put in place, and that's that feudal system that was created from the beginning, both before and after the flood.
You mentioned that families like the Rothschilds, they are constantly trying to increase their pedigrees to
Yes.
better. So is it fair to say that there are bloodlines that have been added later that were not in the game right from the get-go?
Yeah, the Rothschilds would have been, because they were probably some sort of linkage back to either King Saul or to King David somehow, some way, but they've been intermarrying ever since, and they've been quite successful in their rise to wealth and power. So, but you see a better understanding of it today if you look at, let's say, people like Bill Gates and the new money. Let's put it that way. So these people may not be of much in nobility, or may not have any bloodlines to them. But once they earn so much money, they need to bring them in. And so you get the Bohemian Grove organization in the United States, which is more of an Illuminati lower level, to the Rosicrucian and Committee of 300 sponsored Bilderbergers of Europe. But it's the same thing. So the most powerful, wealthy, and rising stars, that would come from graduating through Bohemian Grove are invited to go to the Bilderbergers. And then they're going to meet with the bloodline members of the Bilderbergers once a year and get their marching orders to go back to the rest of the world. And in return for doing that, their offspring are going to be permitted to intermarry into the bloodlines, and over generations rise up to a higher level of that hierarchical order. And that's why that pedigree that is so important for the royals to keep and impose, to assert that position. And people going forward that intermarrying are going to keep those genealogies as they move up, very, step by step. But they'll never get to the top where the royals are, because that's an elite group of families, right?
Yeah, and exactly what you described, that is why I always say voting makes no sense. It makes no sense, because you always end up with somebody in a high position that has been corrupted behind the curtain.
It is. The only thing is that democracy has been taken over pretty much from the beginning by the elite, right? But you have the ability to influence it through democracy. You may not ever be in totally control, but you can control the terrible nature of the tyrants with democracy. And
that seems to slip away.
But it's elusive. It is. Somebody once told me, though, is that they're permitting a certain amount. That's the only reason why you get some of that influence. And the reason why they permit a certain amount is because it's a better way of controlling the mob. Because how it was set up before, but I think they're going to eliminate democracy anyways. But you had like the mob in Rome, right? They had to pacify them in other ways. How they view democracy is getting that mob into this large sort of cavern of chaos, and then you're going to try and control and move that chaos directionally. Whether or not they stick with that long term or not, I think not, because it's quite inefficient, right? So we'll see what happens. But I think they do like the model of China and Russia, where it's a so-called democracy, a one-party system that's ruled by the bloodlines. Just as Mr. Putin, his name comes out of nowhere 150 years ago with his grandfather. And there's no history before Putin before that. But typically what would happen in Russia is when the royals would have extramarital sex and produce offspring, they would give that child a portion of the name, but not the whole name. And that's what is thought of what happened with Putin's grandfather, in that he's the offspring of a female, obviously, and a member of the Putyanin family, which is the original bloodlines to the czars that ruled out of the Ukraine. And Putin, and that starts to answer a lot of questions why Putin wants the Ukraine back, because that's part of the old empire, and that's where his family bloodlines run from. And so he's more of a tyrant than sort of that pure bloodline that they want, but he's using that bloodline as his leverage within the New World Order. The problem is he doesn't have the purest of bloodlines, which is one big issue with Putin. But the other one is he wants a larger role, and the Western families want to permit him to have. So he's going to take it, just as she wants a larger role than the Western families want him to have, but they're just going to take it. And that's why you're going to see this continual emergence of these tyrants and royal bloodlines assembling into these 10 blocks or groups of nations or spheres of influence, because it's not going to go totally the way the Western families want it to go.
So now what is the relationship between the bloodline families and the secret societies? Do you have to be of a bloodline to join a secret society?
Well, they say no, but the answer is yes. So the lowest order is the Freemasonry societies, and you still have to be invited.
Yeah.
And they tend to invite when they're trying to add to their population, so that they have this protection to work from behind to do their agenda. But they tend to invite people that still have bloodlines, and they do that through the genealogy. So they come and tap you on the shoulder and say, we'd like you to join, and lo and behold, you've got some distant bloodlines that go back to the nobility. So you have to be invited. But that's the place where you start to teach the lower levels, and they get to rise. And if you're permitted to rise, you're going to rise to a 33rd degree Scottish Rite, or a 3rd degree York Rite, which is the old system of the 3 degrees. And so that's the first sort of level of adepthood, but that's way down the chain. So you've got the Illuminati that's above that. You've got the Rosicrucians above that. Sort of imagine this tree trunk and these organizations that these ones are working with overseas, that go out in branches. And the Rosicrucians at the top level are all purebloods, right? So the purebloods are the royal families. And the Rosicrucians answer to the Committee of 300, of all 300 members representing an extended 300 branches of Western families. And above that, you have the Council of 33. So it's narrowing down to 33 families that are in control based on the age of their bloodline and the nobility of their bloodline. And then above that, you have the 13 families. And then you have the other similar type of structure around the world that would work in parallel. And so the Royal Masons are what they're called in history, are the ones who created these organizations. And so they rule from the Rosicrucians up. So when you had the creation, for example, of the Jesuits within the Catholic Church to replace the Templars, they were called the New Templars. They were first tried to be replaced in 1317, where 13 or 33 invisible ones from the families, as they were called, went to negotiate with the Pope, and they said, yes, we'll reestablish them, but we're going to control everything, and none of you are going to be part of it. They said no, and they went back underground. And that's when you see the rise of the Rosicrucian order, actually a little bit before, but visibly you see the rise of the Red Cross order. That goes back into history of Royal Masons, that is going to form all of the modern secret societies that we have today, whether it's the Illuminati, or it's the Rothschilds banking arms, or it's the Freemasonry, all of these, or the Royal Society that the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians formed together. These are all part of what the Rosicrucians are setting up as part of this hierarchy order. And so when they set up the Jesuits, they're set up by these royal bloodlines, and one specifically in Spain, which is the Montesa order, which is established in 1307 by the King of Spain, that is going to control the Templar money that they're going to take over in Spain, right? So this is this royal order. This is the order that will sponsor Ignatius of Loyola starting in the late 1520s, and then sponsoring him through the Catholic Church to become a royal order. And this is one of the Borgia family, whose is the leader of the Montesa order. Borgia had 3 popes at least, so they're part of the black nobility of the Catholic Church. And then by 1570, Borgia becomes the Grand Master or the leader of the Jesuits. And then working with the King of Spain, they get control of the banking, and they already had control of the education to take over the seminary schools. Now they're going to get control of the banking through a couple of maneuvers. And I have a great document of the Jesuits that'll walk people through all of this, that they get control of the banking. And then they're going to move that banking arm to Switzerland, who has the cross of the Knights of St. John, the Hospitalators, and this is the same cross that Switzerland is going to take as a flag. They're going to move that banking arm there. Why? Because the money that was in France moved to Switzerland at the fall of the Knights Templar to the Hospitallers, a sister organization. And that's where Swiss banking started. So you had a conversion then of the Catholic banking and the Templar banking put back together in Switzerland. And then in the 20th century, you had the Rothschilds establishing themselves over in Switzerland. So they got control of all the banking again, which they had control of through the Templars before they fell. So, and I think where I was going with all of this before I got onto that long sort of rant is that they are the leaders as the Royal Masons of all of these orders. So the Jesuits would report into the Rosicrucians because they were sponsored by the Rosicrucians. As you look at that tree trunk and these branches that go out down that trunk as to who they would fit into. So the Bilderbergers are part of the Committee of 300, which is all royal families. And then the lower level is that new money. So that's the branch that would fit into the trunk, into the Committee of 300. So the Club of Rome, which was created in the 60s, you've got 2 levels of purebloods. You've got old money and new money that were organized. So Trudeau was a member, Pierre Trudeau was a member of the Club of Rome when it was formed in the 60s, who Justin Trudeau is the son of, and whose mother is a St. Clair from the creators of the Freemasonic Society bloodline. And they formed that group in the 60s to prepare for the end time. They divided the world into, guess what? 10 groups of nations, trading blocks, spheres of influence, whatever you want to call it. And they're trying to cattle herd the world into that. And that's the same number as the 10 kings of Atlantis. That was understood as the golden age and the helm of world government in the antediluvian world. And the same number of the 10 in Daniel 2, 7, Revelation 13 and 17. Those are the same 10 kings that will be ruling. They come out of the beast empires, so to speak. So the last one would have been the Roman Empire, but there will be 10 groups of nations in the world government of the last 7 years.
Okay, so you already touched on the Borgias, and we have other papal bloodlines like Orsini's and the Medicis. Medicis, by the way, they are back in the traditional banking system. They have reopened after 500 years, and this time it's crypto friendly.
Of course.
Of course it is.
Yeah, and they have bloodlines. The Medicis have bloodlines that go back to Tyr, and that the trading system from Phoenicia, and but the other black nobility, and there's quite a list of them, and they're the ones who control the Vatican.
Just for clarification, so when you say black nobility, are you talking about the papal bloodlines?
Yes.
Okay.
But in a more confined context, because the black nobility will be royal bloodlines that I'll get to in a second as well. But they control it with, and that's why, if you understand that organizational structure I was alluding to earlier in terms of the priest class, those are all royals. have been all the way through. That's the polytheist structure. So it was very, very important for the bloodlines, and in this case, with the Italian bloodlines that like to call themselves the Black Nobility, which is part of the Rex Deus bloodline. Although I've heard the term Black Nobility for all of the European bloodlines as well. So they're kind of interchangeable, but more notably for the Italian bloodlines, they have all through the Catholic history have had their elites, their nobility, who are the priests of the upper and ruling class, right? Because they're the only educated ones, right? They controlled that, just as they did with the religion in Egypt. Now, the bloodlines that are the Black nobility of Italy, they trace their bloodlines and genealogies back to, of course, Julius Caesar and the Senate and Augustine, and their bloodlines back to the original gods of Italy and the Etruscan gods in particular.
Yeah. So, and now we have this wonderful fairy tale that we shook it all off. Once the USA were founded, we got rid of the royals, and it is a whole new concept, totally different agenda, and so on and so forth. And now when you look back, all America, including Barack Obama, funny enough, all of them have family ties to British royals.
They do. So before Barack Obama, all the presidents before took their genealogy back to the Plantagenet, which was King John and Richard of England, Richard the Lionheart, but King John, who was forced to sign the Magna Carta. And that's the Plantagenet comes from the Anjou family. It's an offshoot of the Anjou. The Anjou were one of the main families of Sicily and of the Lorraine region, along with the de Payan and de Bouillon families. Those three names were founders of the Knights Templar. So the Knights Templar, who are the creators of the modern secret societies, were created from the Royal Masons of Europe. Only two members were not sort of sons of kings in that. They were two Cistercian Benedictine monks who would have been of the bloodlines anyways, just as Saint Bernard, who wrote the letter to create the Templars and wrote their constitution, was interrelated with many of the Templar families. Okay, so he's bloodline as well. And that shows you that you know, even back then, you have that visible bloodlines of the Black nobility that are running the papal church. So you have the Anjou family, who is going to take and the de Payan and de Bouillon in particular, that take their bloodlines back to the Merovingians, that will take their bloodlines back into prehistory. And so you need to understand that Royal Masonry is the orders that control all of the secret societies and always have. So when you have like the Knights of the Seraphim, which is the royal family order of Sweden, and seraphim are these fallen angels, I mean, they don't hide their imagery. And there are all sorts of royal orders that are offshoots at the top level of that tree that would include all of the royal family members and their cousins and wherever they fit. And every person born into those families has a specific role and agenda to do. That's how organized they are. And when you look at the United States,
that person does not want to do that?
That's a good question. So I think,
for whatever reason, I mean,
yeah. Well, typically, I mean, that's going to be part of the case. So either they're going to have to disappear, or they're going to have to agree to the terms of the separation. Right? So you may look at what's going on with Prince Harry today, right? He's not agreed. So but he has to agree to a certain, we don't know what those details are, but there's things he can and he can't do. And if he doesn't, it'd be big trouble for him, probably. But Go ahead.
I saw a cartoon, not a cartoon, but a meme. So you saw Prince Harry and Meghan on the one
Yeah.
side, and on the other side, Oprah. And around their seats, there were piled up dollar notes, money, all around them. And then Meghan said, life is so hard. And then
Yes.
Oprah said, oh, I can relate.
Yes, they're so oppressed. Yeah, hardly believable. So, and it's important to understand this because when you talked about the USA and everybody, as you said, okay, they were ending that whole reign. It was an experiment, but more of a platform to move the agenda ahead around the world. And what was going on was this rivalry that I talked about earlier in the show. So you had going on just before the American Revolution, you had an ending of the Unicorn dynasty, the Stuarts, right? And you had the Hanoverian kings being installed out of Germany because they're tired of the Catholic Protestant wars with different Stuarts. And so this is now a move by the Jacobite movement, which is part of the secret societies. And I write about this in my book and show people the connections of it and sponsored by the French to try and get away from the rule of the Hanovers, which are clear rivals, as coming out of the Kaiser group of bloodlines, and to be able to do things on their own. So they wanted to. They basically said, we've lost control of the English and Scottish crowns, but we can now sponsor a new country, and that's why you have all the Masons involved in the writing of the Constitution, forming of the rebellion, running the army. I mean, whether it's Franklin, whether it's Washington, I mean, it is just inundated with bloodline royal Masons, maybe a little bit lower down, but all bloodline Masons, and establishing a platform to create this order that they want, that is the whole world of independent states working together under one central government. And so that was going to be a model for this new age, or this new Atlantis that they want to build.
So now, like, I guess it was 3 years ago in the meantime, we did this interview about the guardians of the Antichrist. So there is this line of thought out there that the Antichrist will come through the 13th bloodline, and that bloodline is very hard to trace because they weave in and out of
Yes.
12 others.
Yep.
But that definitely Sinclair belongs to that, and that
Yes.
this bloodline believes that they have the blood of Jesus and of Lucifer.
Yes. So the Sinclairs originally were the St. Clairs. And so St. Clair was a battle partner of Henri de Paon, one of the founders and one of the unwritten members to the Templars. The St. Clairs changed their name to St. Clair from Rollo at the time of expropriating Normandy in the treaty that was named St. Clair, in honor of taking and annexing that land. And those were the Swedish bloodlines that go back to the gods Odin. And so the St. Clairs have intermarried throughout that period going forward. And probably before, when you consider the allegories and genealogies that are written into King Arthur, but that's another rabbit hole I won't go down. We'll just leave it here and keep it as simple as possible for people. And so they intermarried with the royal bloodlines all the way through. And extending out of that invasion was the de Bruce family, which became Robert the Bruce this family that, takes over the King of Scotland. These are the same ones that are going to, with the Normandy invasion of England, with William the Conqueror. It's the same bloodline that is intermarrying into that bloodline. The reason why I'm going through some of this is because this is a very ennobled bloodline, the St. Clair bloodline, and it's part of the Unicorn dynasty as well, of the Stuart dynasty, because the Sinclairs were the St. Clairs and were part of the de Bruces and a couple other main families that were taking control of Scotland of that time. And so typically that St. Clair bloodline is linked through the Stuart dynasty, which is thought to be the most ennobled bloodline since the Merovingian. So that's one of those major sort of contenders. But you can't, and that bloodline is kind of scioned into the, not kind of, is scioned into the English dynasty of the Windsors today. And even though they've got bloodlines that, have other scioning that, are Hanoverian, and according to Charles goes back to Vlad the Impaler, and who knows how far and how many areas that go back to. That is one of those main lines that we need to be aware of, both the Windsors and the Stuart bloodline. But there are others, and so you have like the Anjou, which we talked about, that produced the Plantagenet. And the Anjou have two separate arms that have claims to the King of Jerusalem title. The one that's the most famous one that we know is the one that comes down through the excuse me, the bloodlines of the Lorraine region, where one of those families came from, and that's the same place as de Bouillon and de Payon came from, and they would have been intermarrying. And that bloodline carried a King of Jerusalem title that was crowned by an ancestor of Anjou in 1118 in a small priory in Jerusalem, the King of Jerusalem title. That Lorraine Anjou title was passed on to the Habsburgs with an intermarriage, which became the Habsburg Lorraine dynasty. That was then passed on to the Bourbon family of Spain. And so King Juan Carlos had the King of Jerusalem title. And that is now part and held by King Philippe. And this is the title that they believe that they are inherited with those scion bloodlines that not only go back to the Nephilim, but through King Saul and through King David and through Mary Magdalene and Jesus, because they don't believe Jesus died on the cross and he survived to have children with Mary Magdalene. And so all of those bloodlines are in there. What's important to understand about that is Jerusalem was awarded to the Benjamites that King Saul was part of. And that's that title to Jerusalem that they want their bloodline to be crowned with at the abomination in the temple at the 3.5-year point in the last 7 years. So you've got, even within the King of Jerusalem title, you've got two factions in there. But also understand all the families want to be the royal family, right? Not just the ones that are trying to exert it through their position in the hierarchy. So there's always that rivalry that's going on there. So you've got lots of those bloodlines that are competing for it, and only they've got 3 people that know who the contender for Antichrist is at any one time. And typically that's understood that 3 of them know of 3 that are prepared.
But we do not know who these 3 are.
No, we don't. And what's important to understand is that they initiate in the Royal Mason level of secret societies and bloodlines, they initiate from childhood, not through Freemasonry as the entry level. And so they are an adept by the time they're 18 or maybe even younger. But they're not allowed to have an adept title. So if you ever hear of a 32nd degree adept, they either don't know what they're talking about, or they're referring to somebody who hasn't reached the age where they can accept that adepthood. And these ones that they take the select of the bloodlines and the talent and prepare them to be ready at any generation at any time. So there's always going to be more than one that's prepared. I'm told 3, one known by each of the 3 who knows of the other ones. And some people say they don't know of the other ones, but there's 3 that know of them as a whole, and they protect that secret. And again, you have to understand, I don't have direct access to the royal families. This is just information that sort of comes down on the research that I found. So it's not always perfectly consistent, but it's a very small group of a very few families that are in control of it.
Do you have any idea what is the attraction? What makes it so special to them? I mean, that is what they believe. In that case, it doesn't matter what we believe, because they act on it and they have the money to do it. So,
right.
But
well,
what's so special to them, having this satanic bloodline and the Jesus bloodline, you know? Somehow, you know, my reaction to that is, well, make up your mind. Yeah,
I agree. Pick a side, right? And don't try and mix it up. But here's what I think is why, because it is on one hand absolutely opposed to, you know, who they originally came from. So why would they want that? Well, I think 2 things. One is it sells to the world even more so if they've got bloodlines that sort of scoops up more people, more religions. But I think it's deeper than that. I think it's part of the core belief system of the original rebellion with the fallen angels. And so when Satan rebelled and convinced 1/3 of the other angels to rebel, he wanted to raise his throne, as it's talked about in Isaiah 14, up to heaven, and to be like God. And everything he does is to be like God and to counterfeit it. So he wanted to have a counterfeit realm to live in. He wanted to have counterfeit angels following him. He wanted to have counterfeit offspring with the royal bloodlines that they created through the Nephilim and the Rephaim. They've had a counterfeit religion or a worship system. They have counterfeit scriptures. They have counterfeit laws and ways of doing things. They will have a counterfeit Armageddon. They will have a counterfeit Messiah, because in every religion around the world, you have a common thing about an end time with a Messiah-like figure, whether it's Lord Maitreya, the new Buddha, or it is the Mahdi, or, you name it. They all the old religions have that within it, that there's a time where they'll become an incarnated individual of a god, whether it's Vishnu or whichever one around the world you want to use. Vishnu would be the most well understood one as being incarnating in Buddha, for example, and is expected to be incarnating into the new Buddha. It sort of is that belief system that they want to wrap all of the religions and peoples as possible to control them when they take over, and to complete the counterfeit.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be what's driving them, is that counterfeit. And to me, it still doesn't make any sense. Just wipe out the humans and establish your leader. But they want to have enough humans, I think, to work for them, to be their slaves, to be the people of sacrifice.
Maybe 500 million?
Maybe 500 million, yes. Might be the number.
Is that a good number for you?
Well, apparently it is for them. They published it as that in the guide stones. So I think that's what's going on. They want to create that sort of pedigree that is indisputable to fool humans. The angels are providing the guidance on this. The humans don't know. They follow, and the Nephilim don't know. They follow their gods and the demigods that are leading them, and they're lying to them, and they're telling them they can win. And if you go back into Gnosticism in the belief system, this will be another link that I think a lot of people might overlook. So in Gnosticism, which is the religion of the secret societies, and it's this global Gnosticism that they want to bring up back all the old religions, because it all originates from one pantheon. And they want to bring that back. But in that belief system, and in Gnosticism in particular, because it's sort of spelled out, they look at Sophia as being this mother goddess who, with this universal life force, created the 7 powerful angels. And in that, they name an angel called Aiel de Boath, or Intermarriage, as the god of the Jewish people and the angel of the Jewish people, that went rogue, that rebelled against the other angels and imposed their own religion. Intermarriage is another name for Aiel de Boath, yes. And so in that belief system, it's part of that original 7 that was created by Sophia and this nebulous life force.
Sophia.
Yeah, and so if they want to have a pedigree that includes everything that goes back to that, then they would include the God of the Bible somehow, some way. And by implication, they would be saying that he would have created offspring as well.
Yeah. So now, do you think that it might come to a situation where we will see that those families, because we know that there will be a couple of antichrists, running for office, and then one will make it. Do you think they will start exposing each other? Do you think they will go as far as that and start throwing dirt at each other?
I think that's likely to happen. I think it's going to become very confusing. And only one can become ultimate antichrist. So, and we know in the book of John and in Mark and Matthew is that there's going to be antichrist plural. So you're going to have those competing bloodlines all trying to be antichrist. So picking the first one that comes along is going to be a mistake, because there's going to have to be a settling out. And I think there's going to be a settling out to the point where you're going to have a counterfeit Armageddon. And then the true Antichrist is going to take credit for winning that Armageddon to totally counterfeit Jesus coming back at Armageddon. And
then out of those ashes, he erects his empire.
Yeah. So, as Daniel says, there's an overwhelming army that's wiped out before him. In the Ezekiel 38 and 39 Gog and Magog war. Gog, as you take that back into Greek and into Hebrew, is also an allegory for an future antichrist figure. And that's an end time war, but it's not the Armageddon war. It's the Joel 1 and 2 war that matches up with the Revelation 9 war after the abyss is opened. And this is the one that is the army that is wiped out before the midpoint of the last 7 years by biblical chronology. And after that overwhelming army and this war is over, that's when Daniel and Luke talks about Antichrist moving his armies into Jerusalem. And then he sets himself up as the king of Jerusalem.
When they start throwing dirt at each other and exposing each other, do you think that could also lead to war?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It leads to this larger war because you have several groups of nations in that alliance in the Gog War that includes the Persians, which is Iran and Iraq of today, and a few other countries of old. You've got the Russians that are involved in there. You may even have the Germans that are involved, depending on who Gomer is reckoned by. And there's, again, a lot of people have different theories on that. And you've got nations of North Africa that are in this alliance to destroy the Jewish people from the face of the earth. And this is a move to take over Jerusalem, right? Mm. And so the leader of that is an Antichrist type figure, Gog, who wants to be ruling from Jerusalem and is going to try and do it by force. So there's going to be those wars, and there's going to be other wars as they're rising in power. So we're going to see the Russian Federation, and we're going to see China and the other groups that are doing wars to add to their empire to create that larger piece of the 10 split of the world. So there's going to be wars based on that. So we're going to see lots of that jockeying of wars and rumors of wars, just as we get the birth pangs saying there will be. But, and even up to the point of the seals where people think it's going to be Armageddon, it's so bad. But it's not. We haven't even gotten at the opening of the seals to this Gog war that I was talking about, let alone Armageddon. So there's going to be lots of seemingly like Armageddon type of events that are going to deceive people and leave that vacuum for these competing antichrists to say, no, he's the false one, I'm the true one.
Mm. Yeah, but when I read the comment section on YouTube, then the return of Jesus is just a heartbeat away.
Lots to be done yet. Lots to unfold. So
yeah, I would say the same, but yeah.
People get ahead of the chronology, and it's laid out, and that's why they're always wrong. And until things are set properly, then it can't happen. So are we probably in that generation? Possibly, but that generation could be 120 years or it could be 70 years, and we don't know whether it takes the full length and what is the true starting point. I think Jerusalem was the starting point, but still we could be a long ways away depending on how long that generation is. But we don't have a universal religion yet. We don't have the Jewish people sacrificing on a wing of the temple yet. We don't have a world government yet. I mean, those are just three things right off the top of my head that aren't in place yet that kicks off the last 7 years.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's lots of things to happen before we get there. And those are big those are large hurdles. They're not easily done, as the occult forces have found out.
Yeah. So we also have in Germany, in the 17th century, there was a family by the name of Rothschild. And then they moved to Scotland and changed their name to Russell.
To what? To Rosalind?
Russell.
Yep.
Russell. So, and we have a Charles Taze Russell, that is the founder of the Watchtower Society. And he has, what I found irritating even as a little child, because my grandmother was one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And I remember the older books, not the newer ones, but the older books, they usually had the winged sun disk on the cover.
Yeah.
And even I had no idea, I was like 4 years old or something, but I looked at that image and I thought, that is weird. What is that doing here? So also when on that cemetery where he is buried, there is this pyramid, and it's not actually the tombstone. This pyramid has been erected to honor him. And Yeah, and it has Knights Templar signs. And so
Yeah.
what do we see? Do the bloodlines, are they also busy giving us religions, cults?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. They tend to found, whether or not it was Mormons that were founded by Masons, and also part of that pacifist movement of a lot of those, they set up different kinds of religions, generally, led by secret society members and bloodlines as the founders. Whether or not they remain in them, they still control them, because most of those at the top have a secret society type of adepthood, a elder circle that rules in secret, and only selected members are permitted to be part of the elder class. So it's a typical secret society type of organization.
Mm. Bloodlines, secret societies. And I have to ask, is there also a connection to the secret services?
Well, a lot of people say there is. And so particularly through working with the Vatican and the Knights of St. John that we mentioned earlier, which was a sister organization to the Knights Templar, and actually created 50 years before. And of course, St. John is adopted by the Gnostics and the royal families as being a Gnostic, that he was in a scene just as Jesus was, and the Essenes are polytheists and they have the religion of Egypt, right? That was originally brought with them. So anyways, that's how they arrive at using John as the first name. Now it's also known as the Knights of Malta, the Knights of Rhodes, as they moved after being expelled out of the Middle East with the Muslims taking back Jerusalem and the Covenant land. So the Knights of St. John is this very powerful organization that reports directly to the Black nobility of Italy, but they have royal bloodline family members from around Europe that are running it. They're typically second in the bloodline, as opposed to the inheriting heir apparent. And that's what it takes to be running it. And so out of this organization, you had a development within the Catholic Church for Catholic purposes and other purposes. The whole concept of modern spy and secret service type of and CIA type of organization. So roll that forward now to the CIA, and with World War II and the evolving from and I can't remember the organization's name before it became the CIA, they're taking advice and learning and being taught by the Knights of St. John and the Vatican how to set up the spy agency.
Yeah, that the Vatican has one of the best, I'm convinced of that, yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the connection that most people make on that. So. So, I mean, but you've got other secret society, you got other, not secret society, but you got other spy agencies around the world, because it's been, around forever. But typically, those spy agencies were run by the royal families, right? And created by them. So, but then again, they were the same ones that were working within the Vatican with their royal families to set up that spy agency. So spy agencies are just another arm of the Masonic royal family organizations. So
yeah, what who was it? 007 in service of his Her Majesty the Queen. Yeah, blah blah.
yes, blah. Yep, there you go. Yep.
Yeah. Because the Queen is so interested in that everything is going smoothly here.
Yes.
People.
Yep. Just for the little people. That's why it's done.
Just for the little people. Yeah. She has such a wonderful heart. You mentioned the Mormons, and the Smith family is also
Masonic. Yep. The founders were Masonic as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, probably the best sort of example as to that elder class level, and then the belief system that they have at the top. I mean, I think people who I don't think people who go to the Mormon Church are bad people. I think they're very, very good people, but that ruling class is a whole different ball game, and they gave themselves their permission to delete anything that they want from Scripture or add to Scripture. They believe that they're going to be little gods in the future world running different planets, and they're all trying to go to the celestial palace and things like that. They have a belief system at the top that is at odds with the Bible that they also utilize within the Mormon Church.
But as far as I understand, that they also get new understanding, and I don't have the feeling that with the Mormons that the scriptures. I have the feeling that that is not as important as what Joseph Smith wrote and others.
Yes, yeah, because they had the authority to make the changes, which gives it a higher level, right? So, and they're, it's also very interesting that they're absolutely obsessed with genealogies.
Yeah, they have one of the greatest genealogy bank. Yeah, the Mormons.
Yeah, that's, again, it's just not what you would expect from a biblically run church, right? And I'm not saying all Christian churches are good churches. I'm certainly not saying that. It's always about the leadership and what's taught. But that is something that is directly opposed to biblical teachings. I mean, these endless genealogies. They're not supposed to put a lot into that, because that's the system of this world. That's the system of the offspring of the fallen angels, those endless genealogies, and the wisdom of the world, and the knowledge and the sciences of the world. That's all part of what's been corrupted. That's why, whether or not it's Scientology that adds that knowledge, it also goes to the understanding of Gnosticism and polytheism as being a knowledge cult. That knowledge will make you a little god. Right? It's part of the two pillars. They need knowledge and they need immortality. And so it's always been that way in polytheism, that knowledge will help you become a god, or to get back to that state of godhood that the original Nephilim and Rephaim once had.
I don't even know where this obsession with godhood comes from. It seems to me like some type of this God complex, like a personality disorder. You know what I mean?
Well, then not only do they want to be back in a position where they can rule, right? Like the original Rephaim and Nephilim did, but they want those additional powers. They want that long life. They want that interaction daily with the gods. They want to live amongst the gods, just as they did in the Golden Age and shortly again after the flood, which I also think were sent to the abyss for creating, and that's why like the Baalim and all of those gods disappeared. You have these parent gods and you have these offspring gods. So let's say you've got Ra and Osiris in the Egyptian one. Osiris is an offspring god, and typically a replacement god that goes to the top of the pantheon, because they have a rebellion. Just as in Greek, you've got Kronos, for example, and Zeus takes over because he overthrows and kills his parents. You can't kill an immortal. I think what's going on there is before the flood, those impassioned parent gods were thrown into the abyss for what they did, creating the giants, just as the Gospel of Sophia talks about in Gnosticism and describes these parent gods. And then after the flood, I think Zeus, who is the father of Hercules, and as one example, these, and let's say Baal of Canaan is the son of El, and he, takes power the same way. He is one of the creators of the Rephaim after the flood. And I think they disappear to the abyss for the same reasons as the parent gods did. I don't think there was a war between the gods. They're part of a host, a hierarchy, an army. So when those first parent gods were taken to the abyss, other ones just moved up in rank. So when that second generation of the Council of Gods of Psalm 82 gets taken to the abyss, they're replaced. Not all the angels are in the abyss that rebel. Just the worst, most evil, and those impassioned ones went to the abyss. And I think that's what is happening when we look at all of these accounts in prehistory that talks about these two different kind of ages of the gods and how they try and make a rationale for that. And so this is the age, though, that they want to bring back, when knowledge was exploding, because you had the knowledge of the gods intermixing with the sciences, and you have the demigods being created. This is the world that they want to recreate.
Yes, I think they would like to have that old system back, in that sense, the so-called New World Order is the old world order.
Yes.
And yeah, go ahead.
And along with that, they want that long immortal life. So if you look at the original Nephilim, they were created with an immortal spirit and were going to live forever. Even their bodies were going to benefit from that counterfeit spirit to live forever. But in Genesis 6:3, in the same verses that it's talking about the creation of the giants, God steps in and limits all life, human and Nephilim, human and giant, to 120 years over time. They lost that immortality. And of course, that's where the demons come from, because the bodies then die out. But the spirit isn't permitted to sleep like humans, nor go to heaven, and has to roam the earth looking for a body to possess to try and interact with. And what they want to bring back is that knowledge cult of all this access to unlimited knowledge and this immortality where they lived at the time along with the angels. So that's what they're trying to bring about in the end time. And that's why they're trying to get those angels out of the abyss in that rebellion against God, to create that whole counterfeit realm that Satan originally tried to do in the original rebellion. The problem is Satan and all the angels know they're already condemned to the lake of fire. They're just lying to all of their offspring.
But I mean, we can say a lot about those bloodlines, and even among those bloodlines, there are hierarchies. We can say a lot, but one thing is for sure: they are not stupid.
No,
yeah,
they're not.
And that is what I have. I have a problem with that. I cannot grasp it. So they must know that all these little g gods, I like to call them, they are not the real creator. I'm sure that they know that and fully comprehend that.
Well, I don't think they do. I think they're brainwashed. Really? Yeah, they believe that Satan is the equal of Adonai, that they like to call the God of the Bible in Gnosticism. And that if you look at polytheism, it's a dualistic religion where you've got good versus evil, male and female, but the good versus evil is in perpetual, forever conflict, with one never fully winning. There may be different ages where one is winning a little bit more than the other. They're wanting to win that realm on their own because Satan is the equal of God. and that they have a chance to win that so that they can interact with their gods, who they believe are the equal of God. And that's why it's important to understand where they believe our God of the Bible fits in terms of Gnosticism within those angels that were created by Sophia and the universal life force, part of that first seven, right?
To me, it is so obvious that you cannot win this psychopathic race to totalitarian, because, you know, when I say, yeah, they want to have back their old world order, I think that will be based on blood sacrifices, pedophilia, and what have you.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what they need the humans for, but just a limited number.
Yeah. And then breed them carefully.
Yeah, they seem to believe this, but they believe that the fallen angels are the good guys. They're the good angels.
Okay.
And they believe they are the children of light. They feel that they are the good ones, and that the humans and the God of the Bible are the evil ones. So it's everything is upside down and inside out, and that they're just fighting for their freedom. It's like that Star Wars analogy, right? It's exactly what they're portraying there. And of course, the evil empire is the evil God of the Bible.
Yeah, and while they are fighting for their freedom, they enslave everybody else.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, and that always happens if you elevate something above everything. Let's say, right now it's medical safety. Everybody, as if, yes, health is important. I get it. I know. But we have arrived at a point where people are afraid because somebody is breathing and is alive. Yeah. Yep. And meaning that is total nonsense. And the numbers are in. Yeah. A lot of people died, especially in the new world order. Sorry, in third world countries.
Yep.
Or they because of hunger and so on and so forth. Or let's say the communistic dream of the equality in society. Yeah, that backfired big time, because the conditions of the workers in the Soviet Union were much worse than the ones in the West. Yeah, yep. I'm not saying here it was perfect, but so anytime you take X, whatever X might be, and you elevate it and put it above everything else, in the process, by doing it, you destroy the very thing that X is.
Exactly.
My goodness. That is sick. And something is not correctly wired here.
I agree. I think, you know, that might be why they're called the terrible ones in the Bible. And that the worst of the terrible ones are locked inside of the abyss, along the cells along the abyss, as Ezekiel 31 and 32 talks about. These are, they look at people outside of their families and bloodlines as cattle. Right? They believe they're superior. They believe this is their divine inheritance. And so they're totally bought in, and that they want to, you know, not only remain in control, but to increase that dominance. And they want to be able to do anything they can without the oversight of the God of the Bible. So they're prepared to do anything to achieve that goal. And in achieving that goal, they're going to bring back for themselves godhood within the physical world. And that's where the technology is designed to get them to, is to create physical bodies that aren't going to die, or to have physical bodies that can be replaced, cloned, and that they can continue to transfer their consciousness in and to put into those bodies all of the bodiless spirits that are roaming, and the ones who are going to come out of the abyss, so that they can interact ongoing as well, and to access all of the knowledge that they believe is transferred in information in the universe by accessing that Atma particle that contains all of the knowledge, that sends all that knowledge around the universe instantaneously through quantum entanglement. All of that is what they're trying to develop to create that point of achieving knowledge and godhood, to make them gods in the physical world and to interact with their ancient gods as it was before they were put into the abyss. That's what they're trying to bring about, in a realm where they're free from any rules, oversight, or influence of the God of the Bible. And they believe their gods are equal. So
yeah. And I think we should also briefly mention that it's not only the secret societies and the so-called royalty. There is no such thing as royalty. That's smoke and mirrors. And yeah.
Well, you know, what's interesting is that word royale, right?
Yeah.
Roy comes from king, and from Latin from reign, and al is a transliteration of el, which is an angel or a god, as you translate that out of Hebrew. They literally believe they're the kings of God.
Yeah, yeah. But they also infiltrate, and they are also ruling via the corporations. They are not just in their secret societies that the majorities of the people do not know much about, and in their so-called royal castles. And no, also the corporations. And as I said to you before we started recording, I think our politicians fail to understand that in the long run, they will be useless. They will get deleted, because the corporations will start ruling directly. They don't no longer need a middleman, the politicians.
Yeah, they'll be the modern city-states. They will be run by the adepts, by the royal masons. They already control those companies anyways with the money. And most people don't realize that the money that the royals own isn't on the books. You only see a small piece.
Yeah.
So when they go to do this global reset, that wealth isn't going to disappear from them, because that is hidden. And even with the ones who are lower down the scale, who have a lot of money, let's say Bill Gates with whatever he has is 100 billion, he might lose most of it in the reset if they confiscate it, but he's going to be still, and his family is going to be controlling these companies and reporting to them, and that wealth will come streaming back. And the trouble is with the Great Reset is that not only will they forgive national debt and then reloan at a lower set of interest rate, you know, let's say 1% as opposed to 7%, so that they can continue to function, but it's designed to take all of the debt away from the average person. So, and that's why they don't care whether you're running up your debt right now. And in exchange for having your debt removed is you're not going to be able to own anything. And then that's going to be paid for by the money confiscated by the people who, you know, have extra money or are really rich but aren't part of the royals, like the money that I said would come from, you know, like the Bill Gates wealth, to pay for that, and then very, very high taxes. So they're going to have an instant socialism set up that never affected the wealthy at all. It's just going to be smoke and mirrors, but the poor will have nothing.
Yeah, and they will be happy.
Or else. Happy or else.
Yeah, exactly.
And as they get us ready, you know, they don't want us to be even eating the good food on the planet. They're getting us ready to eat plastic and vegetable substitutes for meats. I think it's just a a glamorized form of Soylent Green, if you remember that movie. Right? And because, and I don't know whether that will ever be made out of humans or not, but again, that's sort of part of that cannibalistic society that they had in the ancient times. But they want to reserve all the good meat and all the good fruits and vegetables on the earth for themselves, not for the mundane humans.
No. Gary, can you imagine that there might be a candidate for the Antichrist be groomed in the Vatican and might be walking the halls of the Vatican?
Certainly a possibility because of the bloodlines of the black nobility that run it. And so a lot of people think that Antichrist comes through the Vatican Church. I'm not convinced of that. I think it's a possibility. I think it might be one of the Antichrist figures. But I think ultimately Babylon is destroyed by Antichrist at the 3.5-year point. So that's why I say yes to a point, but then there's a point where there's a split. And so there's obviously going to be a rivalry between Antichrist and the religion. So it makes sense that if he's going to set up his own religion, he's probably outside of the Vatican, but sponsored by the Vatican in the beginning. So there's definitely an intimate relationship there, I think, to the ultimate Antichrist. But I don't think he's going to be the Pope.
No, that was not what I was aiming at. But I was thinking, I mean, what a tightly woven net, yeah?
Yeah, very tight.
And I'm sure there are more and more and more levels to it that we don't even know about.
Well, I get asked questions like, it's not possible for them to have done what you think that they've done. And my common response is that they have controlled all of the religions, all of the kingships and dynasties and government from the beginning, all of the knowledge and all of the education from the beginning. They have influenced and brainwashed people all the way through to maintain it because they've had that power from the beginning. And history is written by them. The knowledge that they want out there is released by them. All the knowledge that they have that they don't want released is controlled by them. They have controlled everything from the beginning. And anytime there's been an upstart of whatever it is, let's say Christianity, by the time of Constantine, it's homogenized in with a polytheist religion and then dominated by a hierarchical papacy, which is in the same sort of organizational structure of the fallen angels. And you have all of these angelic words like archbishop and things like that. I won't go into all the details on the etymology of the words, but the original Christian church based on the original Judaic society was a very flat organization, not this hierarchical organization. And its doctrines were changed instantly with that homogenization of the church. So that's when they were able, through that hierarchical organizational structure, to have those who were educated, the elite, become the priests and the leaders of the church right out of the gate with the Roman Church. They always get control.
So that was really, really interesting. I thank you very much. But before I let you go, how is the new book doing? I wanted to ask in the beginning and then I forgot, but now.
Well, I have put that book aside. It's just not going the way I want it to go. It's about Second Exodus, but what I have been working on the last couple of months is another book that is just going really, really good. I'm hoping to have out at the end of the year. So, and I said I would never write a sequel to the Genesis 6 conspiracy because I didn't want to just write more about the same. But this is a sequel, because what I've learned also over the last 4 or 5 years or so is that people want more information. And there's a lot more that, so much that I didn't put in the book. So I'm putting out just a book on
the
giants.
first one is a very short book, so yeah.
Yeah. So this one's going to be more about the giants and how many giants are listed throughout the Bible and how that affects prophecy. So I'm hoping to have that one out by the end of the year. So it's going to have, there's obviously going to be a little bit of overlap, and reading the first book will help a lot as well. But I'm not writing this book so that you can't read it independent, but I don't want to just regurgitate what's in the book. I want it to be sort of more information that's building on it. So hoping that that's going to be out towards the end of the year.
Yeah. Do you have
early
a
next
title?
year? Yeah. It's going to be, what I want for a title and what the publisher ends up accepting are two different things at times, but I want it to be still the Genesis 6 conspiracy with a different subtitle. So I'll be trying to insist on that and branding it as a sequel. And then, so I'm thinking, because it's going to have more direct links to the beast kingdoms and the coming end time empire in terms of how that giant and those bloodlines get more intimately involved in it. And so I'm thinking about something like prehistory and prophecy or something like that for the subtitle.
Yeah, great. I'm pretty sure that people would like to have more information on that subject. So it's probably a good call. And you know what? I think once you have that finished, the other one will go better.
I think so. And I've been fighting it for a while, and I just finally decided, you know what? That's just not real. It's like pushing all the time. I do more on it, but this one here, it's just coming out. So it's like, it's easy to do and it's fun to do. So I think you're right that once I get this project done, I can go back and finish that one.
Yeah, I think so. So that was it, guys. Night Flight for today with the wonderful Gary Wayne. I have so many Waynes on my show. I always have to make sure that I'm not confused. So we see you all next time. Stay safe and sound out there, and bye-bye.